Hey guys, welcome to thinkAside. I'm recording back-to-back videos, and this one's going to be about regulation, but kind of in a different light, I would say. I've talked about it in a few videos and talked about how it's kind of like a manipulative tactic, and I've not made a separate video solely on that, but how the government kind of regulates but doesn't regulate completely, and so it kind of leaves for the direction to be used to the certain company's advantage. You see it in like pharmaceuticals and things like that, how they use the regulation to their advantage, and that's mainly because the government doesn't fully regulate, but they don't completely hands off either, and so instead they kind of just shape it the way that they want to, or at least seems to be the case. So anyway, I wanted to talk about how the I think in general, when I talk to people about regulation, I kind of get the same response: is that it needs to be there, right? We think about how, okay, so like if the FDA, right, say we have a jar of jelly, and the jar of jelly has a list of ingredients, and the company decides to leave out 10 of the ingredients because they don't have to include them, right? Because there's nothing that says they have to. Well, then of course, I, the consumer, could buy it and get super sick and be upset at the ingredient list, or at the the company that caused the cancer, if I could trace it back to that anyway. And there's nothing I could do about it because there would be nothing in place, right? I could probably sue them if those regulations were still in place and such, the laws. But in our society, in the United States anyway, the FDA makes you have to include ingredient lists and all of that good stuff. You see it on your stuff, and of course there's like weird rules with that and whatever, but in general, so that would be a regulation. That would be something that the government is saying, hey, you need to do this, right? We're going to regulate this, and you're going to have to follow it. So that seems great, right? Because of course you need regulation. If you don't have regulation, then it means that you're going to end up with dangerous products that the consumers are going to have, and they're not going to know any better. And that seems reasonable. But we forget the fix or alternative fixes, and that's what I'm getting at here, is that I think a lot of the time we think, okay, well, it needs a fix. There needs to be regulation, otherwise it causes a lot of problems. But what if it wasn't government regulation at all that was in place, and yet it was still safe, right? So what if we had, in this scenario with the jar of jam and the ingredients and whatever else, what if they didn't have to buy the or list the ingredients, but there was a company that was started that says, okay, we'll go ahead and we'll check through all of your ingredients, and we'll certify your jam that it is proper, that it is good, right? As an unbiased company, and whatever, and of course that would have to be proper people and handled correctly and everything else too, and that would be a whole nother thing as well. But if this company existed, then they could take the ingredients and they could look them over and whatever else, and then they could certify it, and they could say, okay, we certify that this is healthy and whatever jam. Right, so now it's sold with that tag on it. Say they put like a sticker on the jam saying it's certified. And so me, the consumer, I'm going to see the ones that aren't certified and the ones that are, and now I get to make the choice. I get to say, as a responsible consumer, because it is, again, it is my job, at least it should be my job, at least I would argue that it should be my job to protect myself, right? It is human nature to be responsible for themselves. It's when we pass that responsibility off to other parties that we get into trouble. So when we have that responsibility for ourselves, so I go to the store and I say, okay, I want this jar of jam. It's certified. I know that it's safe for me. Or I can take the chance with this one. This one is new and isn't certified. It seems to be that they're trustworthy. I've looked into them a little bit and they seem to be doing really good. They're working on getting certified, all this stuff, and I can make that choice. Okay, I'm going to buy this one instead. It's a little bit cheaper and it looks really good. I'm going to try it. Right? That's a choice I could make. That's something it's putting a little more responsibility on myself. It's making it so I have to actually do some more research. I have to use my thinking cap and really consider, is this safe for me? Do I want to take the chance? And So it creates a little bit of a different world for sure, especially when you get into many different aspects of the world. It could cause issues with many different aspects, but there's what I'm getting at is that the regulation isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it doesn't need to be the government. There can be other ways to protect the consumer, and it can be through the consumers. It can be through individuals, through the private sector. Allow companies to come in and handle those things and encourage good behavior, right? Consumers in general, they're not going to buy a bad thing for long. As soon as they find out it's bad, they're going to stop buying it. And we still see that, right? Like we still see bad products being sold through the FDA. I mean, we have sugar, processed foods, we have all of these things that are still extremely bad for you, but you're allowed to buy it, right? So it's not even necessarily that the FDA is protecting you. They are to an extent, but they're still allowing plenty of harm. And that's where my original point in the beginning of this video is that the government regulates, but they don't fully regulate. But they also don't go completely hands off. They regulate it in a way that kind of just creates a certain outcome. And whether that outcome is the outcome they want, I don't know. I think that's a whole different video, a whole different thought process, right? But it's interesting that we think that the government needs to regulate because that's the only fix, but we need to consider alternative fixes beyond that because there are other ways of fixing things, and that's what I'm trying to get you guys to think aside here is that exactly that, right? I've said it like 3 times I think in this video. I'm just trying to pound it in that we can truly find fixes for things in our own way as a society, as a consumer base. We can create those fixes. We don't need to rely on the government to protect us. We don't need them to regulate companies and the big bads and everything else because again they're still allowing harm to be done to us. And what happens is because that still happens, I say because, but look at it this way, okay? So you're relying on the government. You say, government, make sure that I can't consume anything bad. Don't even let me buy it, right? Don't let me buy a single thing that is bad for me. So if that's the pretense, if that's what I'm going to pass the responsibility of, and they're not, and then I end up going and buying food, I'm going to assume that anything I buy, anything I can put my money toward and get in return, that it is fine and healthy for me, that it is good for me. I don't have to think about it because I'm relying on the government to do it for me, to think for me, right? Well, now what happens when I'm still consuming bad things? I'm just not going to think about it. I'm going to see all of the downsides and wonder, why is this happening to me? I'm gaining, 20 pounds a week and I'm having heart palpitations and my toes and fingers get tingly without blood pressure, right? Like I I don't think it's worth it. I don't think it's worth putting that much responsibility and saying government take care of me or any other entity. We've talked about that, right? When you pass the responsibility onto another entity, how long is it before they start looking out for themselves first? And it's the same idea, right? And so let's consider other fixes. Let's, instead of saying government take care of me so I don't have to think for myself, let's learn how to think for ourselves more so that way we don't need the government or any other entity to take care of us. Instead, we can take care of ourselves. We can truly understand that this is what's good for us, right? We can have more confidence as a result. You could even argue that it'll do better for your mental health, being that you're able to do so much for yourself. You can look out for yourselves. You're a sovereign person. And then from there, the government works for you, but in a different way. It works for you to do the things that you can't do, or the things that you need to pass off to them, the bare necessities. And that's vital, and that's where we've gone too far is that we've passed too many responsibilities on to the government. And sorry, I know that this was supposed to be simply about regulation and looking at alternative fixes, but I think this all very much plays as a whole. It all impacts one another. Every little aspect of regulation, the way our mind works, the process of purchasing something, and the lack of thinking or the lack of knowledge that we need to have, and all of these things, like even the regulation and manipulative standpoint, and all of it, it all plays together. It all impacts us, right? It's just one other aspect or one other tactic of how we create a sheeple people. I hate to use that word as of late because I feel like it's kind of an insult to people, but the idea of stick with the herd, and you'll be fine and whatever. But yeah, anyway, I hope you guys think aside the idea that we need regulation and that we can't think for ourselves, right? I truly hope so. I encourage you guys to look for other fixes and to find other ways to solve problems than to saying the government needs to do it. Thank you.